The year is 2042. Across the globe, armed forces clash in large-scale battles, from South Korea and Singapore all the way to Canada and Egypt. The fires of war consume the earth. Droves of so-called no-pats die for the sake of survival. But how did we get here? 2021's Battlefield 2042 is anything but the community's most loved game. A buggy launch, lack of content, disliked gameplay additions, and more have made it probably the most controversial game in the lineup. However, one thing that has stayed by me even after the updates have stopped is the setting. The lack of a single-player campaign has made it hard for people to enjoy the gritty, realistic, and downright cool world Battlefield 2042 has to offer. With all the buzz surrounding the upcoming Battlefield game, I wanted to look back at what I believe is the most underutilized setting in a Battlefield game. 2042 takes place in the same continuity as Battlefield 3 and 4, which should be clear due to the presence of Irish in 2042. So first we must look at how Battlefield 4 left the world. Battlefield 4 depicts the War of 2020 between the United States of America, the People's Republic of China, and the Russian Federation. It can also be assumed allies, such as NATO nations, were part of this conflict. This war has two different endings, however, depending on what happens in the campaign. Either the war is stopped before it escalates at the siege of the Suez Canal, or spirals into a full-blown war between these three superpowers. If we assume the conflict escalates, the fighting spreads to locations such as the Chinese mainland, South China Sea, and Siberia. However, the end of the War of 2020 in this timeline is unknown. What can at least be assumed is that both the United States and Russia survived the war and continue to be global powers into the 2040s. The story of Battlefield 2042 actually starts in 2028, where due to climate change, the world as we know it changes. Coastal cities are devastated by rising sea levels. Droughts and floodings destroy farmland, and such the global food production plummets by more than half. Scientists and other innovators are looking into turning deserts and other environments into places suitable for agriculture. Only 2 years later, in 2030, forest fires caused by immense droughts in Eastern Europe spread to the west, torching farmlands from Kiev to Berlin and destroying the economy of Europe. The euro falls to $0.08 and the European Union is plunged into an economic crisis. A year later, in 2031, it all spirals out of control. The effects of climate change hit the entire world. The fires in Europe and ever-worsening storms cause even greater food shortages, and the collapse of economies. Before long, entire countries collapse due to unrest, and on October 9th, 2033, the first Category 6 hurricane appears. As global shortages continue to tighten the grip on societies, the Second Great Depression starts on January 11th, 2034. A year later, amidst a Europe in turmoil, due to the effects of quite literally everything falling apart, the government of Germany collapses. Following that, the European Union as a whole disbands, and many smaller nations cease to exist. Eventually, 1.2 billion people become displaced without a nation to call home, and many other countries close their borders for these refugees. It is here when the term non-patrioted or no-pat gets mentioned for the first time. Many of these so-called no-pats band together in fleets and conclaves as they seek safety from climate change and persecution in any nation that will take them. By 2037, only two great powers remain, the United States and Russia, who are both spreading their spheres of influence by using espionage and proxy wars, as the world slowly adapts to this new harsh reality. New technologies also surge. Agriculture in the desert, breakthroughs in solar power, seawalls to make coastal cities habitable. Slowly but surely, society rebuilds, and nations open their borders again. However, many no-pats want nothing to do with these so-called nations of the old world, feeling as if they were left behind or abandoned by their former homes or allies. These no-pats have created their own identities and societies away from these countries, becoming a mainstay in geopolitics. And as a result, many countries such as the United States began calling nopads groups of criminals and illegal smugglers in order to create a mandate to destroy them. As a result, many NOPAD fleets began forming so-called task forces of former soldiers to protect them from outside forces. By 2040, just as the world seems to get a break from all the turmoil, the United States and Canada begin Operation Steadfast Refuge to overcome the consequences of climate change. The terraforming satellite Shearwater 1 is launched, capable of controlling the weather. The two nations hoped that this would be enough to stop devastating hurricanes from terrorizing the lands. However, during Shearwater 1's first attempt to remove a hurricane, it all goes horribly wrong. What exactly happened is still unknown. It could be an error or sabotage, but Shearwater 1 releases an EMP blast across the entire atmosphere, causing a shutdown of energy supplies around the world and collapsing satellite infrastructure and control. As a result, the Kessler effect occurs, also known as the collisional cascading. The Kessler effect essentially means that due to the high amount of space debris in the Earth's orbit, from things like satellites and leftovers from spaceships, there's a bigger risk of collision between them. This would eventually lead into a domino effect, where collisions cause more space debris, causing more collisions, which then cause even more debris, until eventually most, if not all, satellites and other installations in space are destroyed or are taken out of orbit. In the end, around 70% of all satellites are destroyed. Some even crash down onto the Earth, and there are claims they've taken lives. Due to this, a global blackout plunges the world into a digital darkness. Communication grids go dark. Air travel is basically non-existent. Supply lines are destroyed. Prices inflate, and military surveillance is almost impossible. Both the United States and Russia blame each other for the blackout. Tensions rise to a new boiling point. The two superpowers end up waging a shadow war against each other in order to secure vital resources for their spheres of influence. Task forces of nopads begin being hired by both Russia and the US to steal or defend resources, such as water, fuel, food, rare earth minerals, and the like. In return, they get a share. As these small armed conflicts begin to escalate and worsen, the world holds its breath. A new war can start at any moment. Nopads across the globe are forced to pick a side in this new upcoming war, and any progress that society has made is at risk of being wiped out in one fell swoop. By early 2041, both superpowers begin testing and launching new satellites to replace the old military ones lost during the blackouts of 2040. To everyone's surprise, normal network satellites are being hijacked by nopads, so Russia and the United States both start using more single-use satellites that are harder to hack. They fly over hostile territory, gather info, and then crash into so-called hazard zones, and ground forces are sent in to recover the data. Many NOPAD task forces invade these hazard zones in order to claim the data and sell them off to willing parties in the so-called dark market. Most NOPADs who venture into the hazard zones simply sell the data for money. But one NOPAD, named Oz, sets out a plan to use this data to change the world. This is the overall background and setting of Battlefield 2042. However, this is not everything. As part of the pre-release marketing, DICE and EA released lore tidbits, known as the Journey of the Nopads. This story bridges the gap between the years 2041 and 2042, and also introduces many of the playable specialists from the game. In my opinion, this story is the closest we'll get to some kind of a campaign for the game. This journey starts not with an armed NOPAD, but a journalist by the name of Kaivan Bashir in his former hometown of Doha, Qatar. Kaivan is interested in the issue of armed NOPADs and has been trying to get into contact with them for almost a year. Finally, in the early morning of September 12, 2041, he gets an anonymous message from someone claiming to be Oz, commander of the largest force of armed NOPADs. Of course, he's skeptical. He's been getting these messages all the time. However, this time it was different, as when his chat with this person claiming to be Oz ends, the police break down his door and try to arrest him for aiding a known terrorist. Kaivan is forced to flee his city, which was about to be devastated by a regularly occurring sandstorm. As he hides from armored police vehicles in the LED-strewn city, he begins to notice the unmistakable NOPAD's emblem. a flag with a slash through it, and decides to follow it towards the catacombs under the abandoned football stadium. It is here where he meets the first of these mythical armed no-pads. A relaxed and casual man in his 50s called Piotr Boris Kuskowski, who points him to a tunnel guarded by sentry turrets, his way out. 2 months later, Kaivan is in Alang, India. After following Oz's breadcrumbs, he finds himself in a safe house made from shipping containers with armed no-pads as guards. He notes the different kinds of no-pads present. A former intel officer, a former doctor, a former car mechanic. Yet they all try to hide their former lives behind the no-pad identity and their weapons. A no-pad named Navin Rao explains him how no-pads are persecuted worldwide and branded as smugglers and pirates, joking that that's why they always wear eye patches when delivering food to stranded families. The no-pads task force he suddenly finds himself in is in India with a goal, however: steal a boat. After the Second Great Depression, many shipping lanes were abandoned, with many old shipping freighters ending in Alang to be broken. Yet, many also seem to disappear into thin air, being sold to no-pads for money and goods. But the Indian government was due to put a stop to it soon. The no-pads do manage to steal a freighter and lose their pursuers, much to Rao's expert skills at the helm. The newly dubbed Copperfield and its passengers vanish into the oceans for almost 2 months, until appearing in the port of Singapore and its massive Brani Island's sea wall. Another no-pad aboard the Copperfield, Casper van Dalen, explains to Kaivan how Singapore used to tolerate no-pads. The Copperfield manages to enter the almost fully automated ports unseen in order to pick up some refugees. As Rao ushers them into a shipping container with supplies to last them 10 days, sirens erupt, and the famously brutal Singaporean Port Authority is on their tails. The Copperfield manages to lurch out of the dock, and gunfire erupts in the open waters of Singapore, at least until an ear-splitting cannon shot drives off the authorities. Kaivan looks in awe as a huge fleet of no-pads comes to their aid. Anything from tugboats and fishing trawlers to large container ships. The Copperfield and its crew join the fleet. In early May of 2042, the fleet has been aimlessly waiting in the Yellow Sea, waiting for orders from Oz, their commander. The no-pad McKay jokes that he takes need to know to a new level. While he waits, Kaivan focuses on the steady stream of news coming in, with one story piquing his interest. Earlier that day, an executive assistant at Daesong Electronics, the company responsible for most of the global internet, stole 10 petabytes worth of internal data. Authorities believe the perpetrator, a Korean woman in her 20s, was working for the Americans or Russians. However, it is soon made clear how wrong they were, as a Daesong helicopter crashes near the ship, and the same woman from the headlines parachutes onto the deck. The no-pad Jisoo Pike had infiltrated Daesong at Oz's orders. It becomes clear to Kaivan that these no-pads aren't mere underdogs fighting for survival. Who else could infiltrate a tech giant like that? This feeling is confirmed in July, where the no-pads fleet arrives in French Guiana and receives over 200 million Singapore dollars from a Russian submarine. A day later, they receive 5 shipping containers from a Russian cargo ship. They're said to contain pineapples, but Kaivan notes the contents make a very distinct clang on the deck. 3 weeks later, they're moving the containers by rail into French Guiana, a place rumored to be of interest to the Americans due to an old European satellite launch site. Russia seems to believe the rumors and has been encouraging uprisings against the American army presence in the region, which no-pad Maria Falk, a former combat medic, jokes is Russia's specialty. When they arrive in Kourou, they give the local militia the cargo. As one by one the cargo crates open, Kaivan laughs after seeing a real pineapple, but quickly stops after Russian rocket launches are revealed beneath them. Before anyone can speak, American forces swarm the area and a firefight ensues. Kaivan feels a sharp pain in his left side and blacks out. He survives thanks to Maria's quick thinking as she coordinates an exfil of the no-pads. But now Kaivan starts to worry even more. Have the no-pads lost sight of the cost of survival? Has he? Eventually, Kaivan and the other no-pads end up in an oil facility in Antarctica, Russia's gas station at the end of the world. He explains that for years the no-pads relied on Russia for their oil, but due to the tensions between Russia and the US, the no-pads are cut off. If they want to have oil again, They have to join Russia, and Oz is unwilling to pay that price. The Notepad Konstantin Angel says that war is coming and everyone knows it. Notepads shouldn't choose sides, he continues, but also says that sometimes war is the only way home. Suddenly, klaxons come alive and wail as an American destroyer appears in the waters, and the Russian forces open fire until a confident voice from the ship's radio tells them to stand down. The American destroyer is flying the Notepad emblem. Oz had sent one of his most reliable captains to take the stranded notepads away, with Kaivan rushing aboard the MSF-04 Exodus. The Exodus is under the command of a former US Marine, Kaivan learns, and is currently heading towards Freetown Port in Sierra Leone. Once they dock, he wants to go to Cairo and start a new life, going legit, after living among the notepads for 13 months. But the Exodus would never make it to Freetown. It suddenly diverts course north, towards Europe. A new mission from Oz has reached the captain. One shot at a new future. What happens next are the events of the Exodus short film. Kaivan does not know why Oz rerouted the Exodus to the remnants of London, or why the ship's captain, Kimball Iris Graves, left alone and returned with a bleeding marine, a briefcase, and orders for a rendezvous in the ocean. However, before he can fully wrap his mind around it, 3 condors suddenly attack the ship, and it heads into a Category 5 storm. The notepads aboard the Exodus, including Raoul, McKay, Falk, Casper, Pike, and Boris, fight valiantly against the soldiers rappelling from the condors and try to shield the refugees. But the watertight door shielding them explodes, and a dark uniformed soldier takes one thing: Iris' son Omar. Kaivan knows he can't stay idle and wants to help the boy. He does this by freeing the Marine the captain brought on board, Clayton Pekowski, an old friend of the captain, who in the end sacrifices himself to save Omar. However, Oz manages to get his hands on the briefcase, which is intel about the American Shearwater 1. After malfunctioning, it's about to crash into Doha. The US scrambles to recover their secret, and Russia is moving in to take it for themselves. Iris decides it's up to the remaining notepads of the Exodus to stop Oz from plunging the world into chaos again. As American and Russian troops are about to collide into a new world war, the notepads are going to get into the middle of it. What intrigues me the most about Battlefield 2042's setting is how eerily grim and realistic it is. The effects of climate change are already felt across the world. It's not hard to imagine only getting worse with the same results: loss of farmland, coastal cities being destroyed by floods, political instabilities causing nations to be wiped from the map, and rising tensions as remaining powers fight for resources. Even the idea of non-patriots doesn't seem too far-fetched. It's pretty certain that if a large group of nations fall, the others won't want to take in its people as refugees, as it tries to shore up its own defenses. Furthermore, I think the story of Kaivan and the journey of the notepads could have served as a brilliant campaign, as the story takes you to almost every map in the game, has you meet many of the specialists, and it's a pretty fun story involving Oz and his motivations and the deeper discussion surrounding what is a notepad. However, when you play the game now, it's hard to understand the reasons why we fight. Who is Oz? What about all the lore tidbits in the game itself? But in the end, I think Battlefield 2042's narrative deserves another shot in any form whatsoever.